Where are we?
Where are you? Where did you go?
Right now you're in a kind of a limbo. You're neither here nor there.
Hey! Where are you? Where are we?
Between light and shadow.
Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, months turn into years. Well, 1 year at least. It's been a year, over a year actually, since our last episode. Now, I was planning an extended break, but not this extended. But hey, things happen. Life happens. Other projects happen. As some of you know, I had the privilege of providing audio commentary tracks for Kino Lorber's release of The Outer Limits on Blu-ray. I covered 7 episodes in all, 3 from Season 1 and 4 from Season 2. As I've stated many times here on the podcast, The Outer Limits is my second favorite TV show of all time, so to actually participate in its latest and by far greatest home video incarnation, it's crazy, man. Commentary tracks are hard. You've got to do a lot of research, then script it, then record it. It's kind of like doing this podcast, except I couldn't hide behind sound effects and music and comedy bits and whatever else. It's just me talking continuously for 52 minutes straight. That means a lot more research and a lot more writing. So a fair amount of my 2018 was spent on that project. But perhaps more importantly, that's where my head was. Outer Limits, all day, every day, for months on end. And that's not a complaint. I had a blast, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. But it did mean that I couldn't realistically do the podcast on top of that. So I didn't. This is Craig, and this is Between Light and Shadow, a podcast that compares and contrasts similar episodes of The Twilight Zone and declares a victor. Usually it's the other of the two, since the original almost invariably trounces the imitator, but not always. I don't have statistics, so I have no idea how often a surprise upset happens, but it does happen. I mean, I think it does. But I digress. A funny thing happened on the way to the bathroom this morning. No, seriously, this isn't a bit. My morning routine is, as it surely is for many of you, is to climb out of bed and immediately answer nature's call. During the short walk from my side of the bed to the master bathroom, I usually take a quick second to check my emails and other alerts on my phone. It's usually crap that gets deleted without being read or notifications that get swiped away into oblivion. But this morning, I got a notification that I only get once a year. A beacon of hope and light in a sea of targeted marketing and assorted mind numbers and time wasters. And that, dear listener, was the notification that the official Rondo Hatton Horror Award ballot had been released. Now, I scrolled straight down to category 20, which is Best Multimedia Site, which encompasses podcasts and webcasts. I mean, I wouldn't be on there since I haven't released anything since before last year's Rondos. I was checking to see if some of my favorite podcasts were on the ballot, and they were. My buddy Derek M. Cook's Monster Kid Radio, my compatriot on another continent, Tom Elliott's Twilight Zone podcast, not to mention Damn Dirty Geeks, Kaiju Cast, and the Ray Harryhausen podcast, all represented, all up for a glorious Rondo. But here's the thing. At the top of the list, because it's an alphabetical list, is Between Light and Shadow. Now again, I haven't released any new content since before last year's Rondos, which found us nominated for a second time, but ultimately not even scoring the honorable mention we got the year before. Who the hell nominated this podcast? I mean, I know we continue to get a semi-respectable number of downloads despite the lack of new content, but I absolutely didn't expect to get nominated this year. In fact, I was kind of pissed about it. Stay with me. The fact that we got nominated 2 years ago was a bit of a shock. We were a new podcast at that point, and to get nominated for an award that, frankly, I've coveted before I ever even thought about doing a podcast, well, it kind of fucked with my head. I had no right to expect to win it, but god damn it, I wanted it. Bad. Hence, the embarrassing campaigning I did on Facebook in the weeks leading up to the voting. And like I said, we did get an honorable mention. But it stung not winning. I'm not gonna lie. It stung. I truly admire people who are so secure in themselves that they can say, "It's an honor just to be nominated." Longtime listeners are no doubt aware that I lack even a remote semblance of security in myself and my abilities. I am hyper self-critical. That guy who loses sleep over a single negative iTunes review? Yeah, I'm that guy. I'm not proud of it, but there it is. After I got over it, and myself to a degree, I took a few months off, which I was planning anyway. It wasn't because of that, and resolved that I would no longer care about awards and accolades. I would just do the podcast. And if it was good, and if it deserved such an award, then it would come. When we were nominated again last year, I did 0 campaigning. By then, we'd already wrapped for the season, and to be honest, I was just fucking done doing the podcast. I've bitched and I've griped at length, almost certainly too much length, about how much work it is, how much of my time it takes to do, and how much it takes me away from everything else in my life. And I was worn out. I needed a break. It didn't help that I had that big Outer Limits commentary project looming. The podcast was going to go into mothballs one way or the other. I just couldn't. Like my daughter Kendall would say, I literally couldn't. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months. Late last summer, after the Outer Limits gig had wound down, I started thinking about this podcast. The schedule I'd established called for a return around September. I was monumentally unprepared, but I did consider just saying fuck it and diving back in. I do tend to do my best work under extreme deadlines, so maybe I could have pulled it off. But I didn't want to. The hard truth of it all, I didn't want to come back to this. But I made a promise that I would finish covering season 1. We were 2/3 of the way there when we closed up shop in February 2018. One more series, 12 episodes plus a few random bonus diversion episodes, and we'd be there. And then, if I chose, I could call it quits with my head held high. Those generous souls who backed the Kickstarter campaign that made this podcast a reality in the first place, well, I would have fulfilled my obligation to them. I mean, some could argue that I didn't owe them anything, since I made no promises about how long the podcast would run. This was more of an internal promise. This shit will haunt me the rest of my days if I don't finish it. But still, I didn't want to. Call it Twilight Zone overkill. I felt the same way after the Outer Limits project wrapped up. So much Outer Limits in such a compressed period of time. Craig does not live by the Twilight Zone and the Outer Limits alone. And truth be told, a lot of my attention lately has been focused on the original Star Trek. The Twilight Zone seems, I don't know, really far away from me right now. And then I get this fucking notification about the Rondo Awards. And we're nominated for what exactly? It's like nominating a movie for an Oscar 2 years after it's released. It doesn't make sense. So I turn to my friend, my mentor, my leather-clad, ponytailed Yoda, David J. Scow, and expressed my frustration. His response? I've got a Rondo staring at me right now. I don't think I even need another one. For the TZ podcast, though, I'll thump the tub because I think you would enjoy a Rondo. It's not about the generation of new material. Nobody cares about that. It's about longevity versus visibility. Remember, the people aren't voting for you per se. They're voting for TZ as an evergreen commodity. That's an interesting take. And that's exactly why I didn't bristle much when Tom Elliott won last year for the Twilight Zone podcast. The Twilight Zone won. I imagine anyone who listens to this podcast, maybe listened is more appropriate, past tense, also listens to him. And I imagine every single one of them thinks his is better. Because, well, shit, it is. It is better. And I think I only got an honorable mention the first year because his podcast wasn't nominated. I had no chance in hell when somebody nominated him last year. And here we are again, both nominated. I imagine that Snowball in Hell has a better shot than me. And before you ask, no, I did not get nominated for my Outer Limits commentary tracks. The Outer Limits Blu-rays did get a few nominations, including Category 9, Best Package of DVD Extras, which I'm a part of, which I imagine will go to Dave Scow if it wins. Dave acted as producer of the copious extras on those two sets, not just commentaries, but rare interviews with cast and crew, and a lot of other great stuff. And most of that stuff he provided because he truly is the caretaker of the Outer Limits legacy. So he deserves it. I mean, duh, of course he does. Even though he's already got a Rondo. I'm sure if when he wins this one, he'll modestly foist much of the credit onto me and the rest of his stable of commentators, kind of like Rod Serling shared the credit for the second Emmy he won for The Twilight Zone, in which he famously, or at least semi-famously, credited his fellow writers on the show, chiefly Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont, and said, "Come on over, fellas, and we'll carve it up like a turkey." I went to bed last night more or less unencumbered by this kind of shit. And today, it's been foremost on my mind. And I actually left work early today just to jot down some notes about all this. And now it's led to a new episode. I mean, not a proper episode, but still, here I am talking to you after more than a year of silence. Does this mean new actual episodes of Between Light and Shadow are coming? I don't know. There's a voice in my head telling me I have an obligation and I need to fulfill it. And there's a similar voice telling me that I need to justify this latest Rondo nomination. But there are other voices reminding me how fatigued I get, how much time it takes, how much blood, sweat, and tears go into this. I remember saying on the air at some point that maybe this podcast would serve as a kind of therapy for me and that I'd come out the other side a different person. 2/3 of the way in, I am a different person and not for the better. But maybe that's because I'm not on the other side yet. Maybe this Rondo nomination, which will undoubtedly lead to a third win for somebody else, is a catalyst in disguise. Maybe the glowering irritation I felt all day is a response to what amounts to a kick in the ass. God damn it. It shouldn't be this hard. It just shouldn't. The podcasts I listen to, they all sound like they're having a blast. I need to figure out a way back to simply enjoying this process. And maybe that means a more stripped down approach. Less production, less clips, less comedy bits, and maybe not that last one. Maybe a less strenuous schedule. Maybe bi-weekly instead of weekly. Maybe a different format. Maybe we stop covering 2 episodes at a time. I don't know. I kind of feel like I'm sorting this out and sifting through it all in real time as I'm recording this. And maybe I shouldn't come back at all. Maybe this right here should be the end. The single biggest disappointment I've experienced doing this podcast is the crushing lack of interaction with my listeners. I've always asked for feedback. Email me, comment on the Facebook page. But I've mostly received silence. I mean, there are a few loyal listeners who stay in contact, but the vast majority of the time, the amount of listener contact does not reflect the number of downloads. People are listening, but they ain't talking. And I crave that feedback, that contact, which I guess is a clear sign of my insecurity. So maybe I should put this back on all of you. Do you want more Between Light and Shadow? Do you want to hear my thoughts and interpretations of those 12 Twilight Zone Season 1 episodes that we haven't covered yet? There are some good ones in there. Long Live Walter Jameson, A Stop at Willoughby, The Big Tall Wish, The Purple Testament, and 8 others that escape me at the moment. Plus all the later episodes that we would be comparing and contrasting them against. The last third of Season 1 is essentially already planned. I did that way back. It's just a matter now of actually doing it. So what say you? Do you want this? Is it important enough for you to speak up about it? Email me, guys. zonepod@gmail.com. zonepod@gmail.com. Or look us up on Facebook. Just search for Between Light and Shadow, a Twilight Zone podcast, and you'll find us. And when you find us, like us and follow us. And by God, drop some comments. And then, okay, I'm going to do this. Vote for us in the Rondo Hatton Horror Awards. See the show notes for the details on how to vote. The system is a bit arcane and cumbersome, but hey, what better way to show your love for the show? I'm going to wrap it up for now. I will await contact from each and every one of you. I know, it sounds crazy, but I want to believe that the download numbers equate to a passionate listener base that wants more Between Light and Shadow. And if I'm wrong, well, it won't be the first time. I'm not going to do this if I'm just shouting into a vacuum. So talk to me. Damn it. Talk to me. And yeah, I want a goddamn Rondo, so vote. Until we meet again, kids, whether it's a renewed endeavor or a final farewell, play nice.
Come back to me. I've been waiting here patiently. Come back to me. I've been waiting here patiently. I've been walking a thin white line between love and hate. I could use a little company, a little kindness, go a long way.
between light and shadow.